When a man starts to pull away, the natural instinct for many people is to move closer, to fix, to reassure, to chase. It's almost a reflex born out of fear of losing rejection, fear of rejection, fear that distance means disinterest. But what if instead of reacting, you simply matched his distance? What if instead of chasing, you paused? Because in that moment, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. You reclaim emotional equilibrium. You move from being controlled by the uncertainty of another person's actions to standing in the quiet strength of your own awareness. When you match someone's distance, you are not being cold. You're being conscious. You're saying, I see what's happening, and I choose not to lose myself trying to hold it together. That's not detachment born from ego. It's balance born from self-respect. The truth is, attraction often lives in the space between two people, not in their constant closeness. And when one person keeps closing that space while the other keeps pulling away, tension collapses. The connection becomes suffocating. But when both people hold their ground, when one stops chasing, space becomes meaningful again. That space allows curiosity to return. It gives both people a moment to ask, do I really want this? And if I do, why? And many men, consciously or not, create distance as a way to test emotional safety. They want to see how much power they hold. If your reaction to that distance is panic, they sense that your emotions hinge on their behavior, and that dynamic, however unintentionally, gives them control. But when you respond with calmness, when you match his withdrawal with quiet confidence, it changes the entire psychology of the interaction. Suddenly, he sees that your world doesn't crumble without his attention. That realization forces him to re-examine his assumptions, not just about you, but about the connection itself. The deeper psychology behind this is simple emotional equilibrium commands respect. When you're steady, you communicate that your emotions are not up for negotiation. You're available, but not desperate. You're receptive, but not reliant. This balance is rare, and that's exactly why it's magnetic. It's not something that demands attention. It invites it. And that's the essence of true confidence. You're not trying to prove your worth. You're simply resting in it. When you stop overcompensating for someone's distance, you stop reinforcing the imbalance. You give both of you a chance to reset, to breathe, to feel. Because often, the moment you stop chasing is the moment they start noticing. The silence, the space, the calmness. It all becomes louder than words. It communicates something profound, that your peace is not dependent on their presence. And in that moment, respect grows. Sometimes even more than attraction itself. Matching distance is not about playing games. It's about recognizing that love, to be real, has to exist in mutual effort. You can't carry the connection alone. You can't force interest, and you shouldn't have to. Emotional balance isn't the absence of care. It's the presence of boundaries. And when you stand in that truth, something incredible happens. The right people are drawn closer, and the wrong ones drift away. So the next time someone pulls away, don't chase their shadow. Stand still in your light. Because the one who is meant for you will see your calmness not as indifference, but as strength. And that strength, quiet, grounded, and self-assured, is what makes you unforgettable. When you match a man's distance, something fascinating begins to happen beneath the surface. The dynamic shifts, not because of manipulation, but because your energy changes. When a man senses that you're not trying to pull him closer, it disrupts the pattern he's used to. Many people, when faced with emotional distance, instinctively try to compensate. They send more messages, initiate more conversations, or offer more affection, thinking it will reignite connection. But when that effort isn't met equally, it starts to feel like you're pushing against a wall. And every time you push, that wall grows higher. When you stop doing that, when you stop filling the silence, he's suddenly faced with it. The space he created becomes real, not cushioned by your constant reassurance or pursuit. And that silence can be uncomfortable for him. It's not anger that he feels, though. No, it's awareness. He begins to recognize what your presence added to his life. The emotional warmth, the attention, the energy. It's easy to overlook consistency when it's always available. But take it away, and suddenly its absence becomes louder than its presence ever was. This is the psychological power of space. Distance, when used consciously, isn't about creating tension, it's about restoring perspective. You're allowing both people to reorient themselves emotionally. He gets the chance to feel what disconnection really means. Not the romanticized version of independence, but the actual emotional gap left behind when genuine care withdraws. You, on the other hand, get the clarity to see if his distance was about needing space to reflect or about a lack of true investment. It's a quiet kind of test, not of love, but of alignment. Does he step forward now that the energy is balanced? Or does he stay where he is, comfortable in your absence? That tells you everything you need to know without a single confrontation. Because love doesn't just show up in words, it shows up in movement. What's crucial to understand here is that when you match his distance, your goal isn't to make him chase. It's to preserve your emotional dignity. You're signaling that you value connection, but not at the cost of self-respect. You're choosing stillness over chaos, peace over pursuit. And that decision, though subtle, changes everything. It pulls you out of a reactive mindset and into a reflective one. You stop asking, why is he pulling away? And start asking, why am I so afraid to let him? That shift in questioning is profound because it moves you from dependence to empowerment. You begin to see that distance doesn't destroy real connection. It reveals it. If the bond between you has substance, space won't dissolve it. It might even strengthen it. But if the bond is built on convenience or emotional comfort, space will expose that illusion too. Either way, you win clarity. So don't be afraid of the pause. Don't rush to close the gap just because silence feels uneasy. Let it speak. Because in that quiet space between two people, truth has a way of emerging. And sometimes the way someone handles distance tells you far more about their heart than what they say. When they're close, the real power lies in your composure, in the stillness that says, I care, but I won't chase. That calm, quiet confidence is magnetic, not because it's distant, but because it's rooted in self-worth. And the moment you embody that, everything about the connection either deepens or dissolves exactly as it should. When you match a man's distance and he begins to react, one of the most telling signs isn't in what he says, but in how his energy shifts. See it. You can feel it. Maybe he starts showing up again, not necessarily with grand gestures, but in subtle, intentional ways. He starts commenting on your stories, asking how you've been, or casually reaching out just to check in. These actions might seem small, but psychologically, they reveal a shift. Because when a man feels the loss of your attention, he starts to measure its value. Men, like anyone, can fall into patterns of emotional comfort. They get used to your consistency, your care, your effort. But when that pattern breaks, when your presence is no longer a given, it forces a confrontation within them. It's not just, she's not texting me as much. It's, why do I miss her attention? Why does her silence feel heavier than I expected? That's when his curiosity becomes reflection, and reflection often leads to re-engagement. Now, It's important to understand something deeper here. When you pull back, you're not punishing him. You're rebalancing the dynamic. You're no longer feeding a one-sided connection. And this balance brings truth to the surface. If his interest was real, that distance awakens it. If it wasn't, it exposes the fragility of what was there. Either way, it brings clarity. You see, real attraction doesn't thrive in overexposure. It thrives in space and mystery. It doesn't mean playing games. It means allowing room for genuine curiosity. When you constantly fill the silence, there's no room for him to miss you, no space for him to step forward. But when you match his distance, he suddenly has to decide whether he's willing to meet you halfway or let things fade. That's the moment where truth quietly takes over performance. This is where emotional intelligence becomes key. Instead of reacting to his behavior with anxiety or fear, you respond with composure. You understand that attraction is not sustained through proximity. It's sustained through presence. And presence doesn't always mean being available. It means being intentional. You're no longer communicating just to reassure him. You're communicating when it feels authentic. Here's the paradox that many people miss. When you stop chasing, you become more magnetic. Because people are drawn to emotional stability, not desperation. When you are centered, when you can calmly match his energy rather than resist it, you communicate something far more powerful than words ever could. You're saying, I'm not defined by your attention. I'm defined by my value. And that psychologically shifts everything. Seat. He begins to feel the weight of your absence, not as reflection. He realizes that your presence isn't guaranteed. It's earned. And that realization often reignites a man's sense of purpose in the connection. Because when something meaningful risks being lost, it wakes up the part of him that wants to protect, to reconnect, to invest. But even if he doesn't respond the way you might hope, you still win something deeper. Peace. Because you've stopped fighting for something that should flow naturally. You've stopped overcompensating for someone else's uncertainty. And that choice, while quiet, is one of the most powerful demonstrations of self-worth there is. So, the next time you feel that instinct to chase what's pulling away, remember, space doesn't always signify loss. Sometimes it's the only environment where truth can breathe. Let your silence speak confidence, not confusion. Because when you can hold your center while everything else feels uncertain, that's when you become unforgettable. Not just to him, but to yourself. One of the most revealing moments in any connection comes when you stop overextending yourself and he starts to notice. When you match his distance, you create a natural void, and that void becomes a mirror. It shows him, often for the first time, how much of the connection was being held together by your effort. Maybe it's the way you always initiated conversations, kept things alive, or smoothed over awkward silences. But when you step back, something subtle but profound happens. He begins to feel the weight of your absence, and it challenges him to either rise into that space or let it fade. What's fascinating about this dynamic is that it isn't about manipulation. It's about balance. When you stop doing all the emotional labor, you reveal the truth of the connection. Because a relationship built on uneven effort can only sustain itself for so long before one person quietly begins to withdraw. And when you withdraw, not from anger but from clarity, it invites him to meet you on equal ground. It's not about giving him a taste of his own medicine. It's about giving yourself a taste of peace. Men, like anyone, respond differently to distance depending on their emotional maturity. A man who's emotionally invested will notice your shift immediately. He'll start asking himself questions. Did I do something wrong? Why does she seem different? What happened? That internal discomfort is not a bad thing. It's actually the beginning of awareness. Because when something valuable goes quiet, it forces a person to listen in new ways. Your silence speaks volumes that your words never could. But here's where many people falter. They break the silence too soon. They rush back in to explain themselves, to reassure, to close the gap. But that defeats the purpose. The real transformation happens when you can sit with the discomfort and allow the distance to do its work. Because if he truly values you, he will bridge that gap on his own. And if he doesn't, then his inaction tells you everything you need to know. This is where emotional discipline becomes essential. It's easy to stay silent for a day, but much harder to maintain composure when your heart is involved. Yet it's in that composure that your power lies. You're teaching both yourself and him something fundamental, that love, or even attraction, doesn't thrive on constant availability. It thrives on mutual curiosity, respect, and effort. When you match his distance, you're not closing yourself off. You're simply no longer giving endlessly to a situation that isn't giving equally in return. You're choosing alignment over approval. And in doing that, you become infinitely more magnetic. Not because you're withholding, but because you're grounded in self-respect. You're no longer chasing validation, you're embodying value. And something remarkable happens when you operate from that place. Men sense it. They may not understand it consciously, but they feel it energetically. They sense that you are someone who doesn't need to be chosen to feel worthy, someone who doesn't beg for attention to feel significant. That energy changes the entire dynamic. Suddenly, the power isn't in who texts first or who says what. It's in the quiet confidence of knowing you can walk away and still be whole. So, if you ever find yourself wondering whether to keep trying or to step back, remember this distance isn't always a wall. It can be a filter. It separates what's fleeting from what's real. And when you can hold your space without resentment, without fear, you're not just matching his distance. You're mastering your own emotional boundaries. Because love that's worth having won't fear space. It will respect it. And that respect is where true connection begins to grow. When you match a man's distance, something powerful begins to unfold beneath the surface. He starts to confront the quiet question he's been avoiding. He says, what does her absence mean to me? For many men, that realization doesn't come instantly. Seat, it's not the silence itself that wakes him up. It's what the silence represents. It's the first time he feels what life looks like when you're not there constantly giving, affirming, and investing. It's the first time he experiences the emotional consequence of his own inconsistency. Most people think distance pushes someone away, but the truth is, it reveals who's willing to move closer. When you pull back, a man either recognizes what he's about to lose or confirms that he was never truly present in the first place. That's the beautiful clarity that distance provides. It strips away the illusions. Because when someone's interest is genuine, space doesn't kill connection, it intensifies it. Now, for an emotionally intelligent man, your distance doesn't trigger ego, it triggers introspection. He begins to reflect, sometimes subconsciously, on what caused the shift. He starts noticing the little things he took for granted. Your attention, your enthusiasm, your warmth. That sudden absence of energy creates contrast, and contrast breeds awareness. Without contrast, we remain blind to what we have. That's why many people only realize the depth of their feelings when silence replaces attention. But here's what's fascinating from a psychological perspective. Matching someone's distance doesn't just test them. It tests touch you. Because it requires emotional restraint not to rush in, not to over-explain, not to chase validation. It demands a level of self-worth that says, the socks, if you don't value my presence, I won't compete for your awareness. That mindset shifts everything. It redefines the dynamic from one of pursuit to one of equilibrium. It's in that equilibrium that attraction matures. Because let's be honest, chasing might create excitement, but it doesn't create respect. True romantic tension isn't built by constant proximity, it's sustained by polarity. It's the space between two people that gives the connection room to breathe, to expand, to become real. So when you match a man's distance, you're not rejecting him, you're allowing the dynamic to balance itself. You're saying, so I'm here if you meet me halfway, but I won't carry this alone. And what often happens next is revealing. Some men, when faced with that emotional gap, will rise to meet you. They'll initiate, they'll communicate, they'll realign. Others will retreat further, not because you did something wrong, but because they were never emotionally available to begin with. Either outcome serves you, because both give you truth. That's the deeper purpose of distance. It doesn't create loss, it creates perspective. It teaches you what's real and what's performative. It reminds you that emotional effort must be reciprocated, not rewarded unconditionally. When you match a man's distance, you're not playing a game. You're ending one. You're stepping out of the exhausting cycle of overgiving and into a state of calm confidence. That calmness is magnetic. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It doesn't demand. It's simply as is. And in that stillness, you stop trying to prove your worth and start embodying it. Because at the end of the day, the right person won't be confused by your boundaries. They'll be inspired by them. Distance doesn't scare the right man. It challenges him to grow. And that's where real connection begins. Not in the chase, but in the choice to meet in the middle. When a man realizes that you can match his distance without resentment, something shifts in the emotional dynamic. It's no longer about who needs who more. It becomes about mutual recognition. He begins to sense that you're not dependent on his attention for your emotional balance. And that awareness changes the entire power structure of the connection. You stop being the person who reacts, and you become the one who responds with composure. That composure is what earns real respect, and respect at its core is the foundation of enduring attraction. You see, when someone feels that you can walk away with peace, they start to see you differently. They sense emotional independence, and that's deeply attractive, not because it's distant, but because it's grounded. It shows that your love is a choice, not a need. There's a psychological depth to that energy. It communicates, I want you, but I don't need you to complete me. That's what makes a person irresistible, because nothing is more magnetic than someone who can care deeply without losing themselves in the process. Now, let's look at what often happens when you don't match distance. You begin to overextend. You explain. You try to fix what feels broken. But when you do that, you unconsciously teach the other person that they can give less and still keep you close. You create a pattern where effort becomes uneven and attraction dies in imbalance. Matching someone's distance isn't punishment. It's self-preservation. It's not about withholding affection. It's about respecting energy. It's saying, X, I'm willing to meet you, but not chase you. This is where emotional maturity plays its most important role. Because it's easy to fall into the trap of interpreting distance as rejection. But in reality, distance can be communication. Sometimes people pull back not because they've stopped caring, but because they're processing. They're recalibrating. By not reacting impulsively, you create the space for that process to unfold naturally. You give both of you room to gain perspective rather than panic. That calm restraint, holding your own energy instead of scattering it, is what differentiates emotional strength from emotional dependency. It's not indifference, it's balance. It says, I see your space, and I'll honor it, but I won't shrink to fit your uncertainty. That mindset subtly rewires the dynamic. It makes the connection less about chasing validation and more about mutual clarity. And when he feels that shift, when he realizes that your silence isn't an emotional plea, but a sign of confidence, it forces him to look inward. He starts questioning what he values, what he's afraid of losing, and whether he's capable of matching your energy. That's when true emotional accountability begins. Because love at its healthiest isn't built on reaction. It's built on reflection. The truth is, when you can match distance with grace, you stop operating from fear. You stop trying to hold on to someone who's not reaching back. You stop confusing attachment with connection. And that transformation doesn't just change your relationships, it changes you. You move from needing to be chosen to knowing you're already enough with or without their validation. So, if there's one thing to take away, it's this. Distance doesn't destroy what's real. It reveals it. The person who values you won't fade when you stand still. They'll step forward. And if they don't, that silence isn't a loss. It's clarity. And clarity is always a gift.